Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about the state of healing in Season 1 Dragonflight. We'll talk about Season 2, we'll talk about my opinions about the value of healer. How important is a healer to your keys? Because there's been so much chatter about the 4 DPS keys or 0 healer keys, because a lot of groups were running that in MDI, and now that is also trickling down on the live servers. And before we're gonna do the video, a huge disclaimer: I am against restrictions. I don't want the 4 DPS or 0 healer keys being invalidated or prohibited or not available, because I want the game to be open as possible. I want people to do crazy stuff out there. I want people to break the meta. I want people to do something against what a lot of other people are playing, invent new things. So I don't want the game to be restrictive. I want the game to be as open as possible. Personally, I ran 4 DPS keys before in Shadowlands. I was running Elemental Shaman. I was running that Chain Heal, Chain Lightning, Legendary, and that was really fun to experiment, because 4 DPS keys require a lot of coordination, especially if you're trying to run that in a poke situation. And on top of that, I genuinely believe that 99% of people should not attempt 4 DPS keys, because let's be honest, a healer is there to babysit, and a lot of the times, if people are not playing carefully, healer is pretty mandatory for a lot of people out there, especially if you're unorganized, if you don't have Discord and things like that. So this video is focusing on a very small aspect of the game right now. Honestly, 99% of the people should not even attempt 4 DPS keys. I don't think it's going to be meta, but the fact that some of the top end teams are looking at 4 DPS keys, for example, there's been some live keys like 28 Cause or Court of Stars being done without a healer, that might pose some issues to Blizzard, because they might be looking at how the whole community reacts to this. So why is the 4 DPS or 0 healer keys viable? Why are people running this in MDI? Why are people running this on live servers for certain dungeons? And I think there are multiple reasons why this is possible, or why teams are looking at the group composition and they're like, I don't want to bring a healer here. I want to do a high risk, high reward type of play. Don't bring a healer, have 4 DPS and just blast through the ski. I think one of the reasons is the fact that Protection Paladin is extremely strong right now, and Word of Glory is insanely powerful in terms of group utility, in terms of group healing. But I don't want Prot Paladins to be nerfed. I think that's part of the fantasy. I think the fact that Prot Paladins can provide so much group healing to the group, they provide a lot of interrupts, they provide a lot of utility. That's all part of Prot Paladin's class fantasy, and I think the fact that Prot Paladin is so strong right now, for me, Prot Paladin is the #1 tank right now if you're poking content, because they just provide so much group safety when it comes to a lot of keys out there, especially keys that require a lot of off healing or healing and your healer cannot keep up. I also think that Blizzard has changed their mentality for Mythic Plus specifically, because at the start of Dragonflight, I don't know how many people remember, but the dungeons were pretty wild. A lot of the dungeons had insane amount of healing requirements. For example, Court of Stars' last boss was significantly harder at the start of Dragonflight, and it was really nerfed. For the people who have done Ruby Life Boss, I know people right now don't like Ruby Life Boss because it provides or requires a lot of healing requirements. How many people have done Ruby Life Boss before the multiple nerfs came out? Ruby Life Boss was absolutely wild in terms of how much HPS you need to output. But Blizzard has, over the last couple of weeks, over the last couple of months, slowly nerfed a lot of those healing requirements, and certain dungeons have become you almost don't need a healer depending on which affixes you're doing. Again, you have to remember, Grievous is being removed in Season 2, so there's going to be a little bit less healing requirement as well when looking in the future. So if a Prot Paladin provides a lot of group healing and group utility to your party, you have a lot of dungeons that have been nerfed in terms of heavy healing requirements, and you also have a lot of meta classes that provide a lot of group off healing capabilities, things like Shamans having Ancestral Guidance, things like Druids having Nature's Vigil, and things like Priests having Vampiric Embrace. All of those abilities are going to convert your damage into healing, and if you can chain them properly during heavy healing requirements, during a boss fight on Tyrannical or something along those lines, they can really carry the group. So if you have a really organized group and you can maintain those or use those abilities at the right time, you don't have to have a healer depending on which dungeon, depending on which affix you're doing. And then particularly on live servers, you have rings. You have the Forbidden Reach rings, and the certain combinations of those rings can provide insane amount of self-sustain to the class or to the user itself, and all of a sudden you don't have to worry about your HPS or trying to live, because you're getting a lot of different sources of off healing from your ring, from your Prot Paladin, from your abilities. And if you play them correctly, if you have an organized group, you can have a good time with that 4 DPS 0 healer combination. And you don't have to take my word for it, you've seen this on live servers. Some of the highest keys in the world right now have been done with 4 DPS. you have to keep in mind, not every dungeon is viable for this. Some of the dungeons like Ruby Life Pools, it's still one of the most healing intensive dungeon in the game. So how do we solve that? I don't want to say solve, because I want the game to be as open as possible. I don't want the game to be restrictive. I want people to play whatever compositions they want. But how could we increase the value of healers? Because right now, certain groups are looking at dungeons and affixes and they're like, we don't need a healer. We're gonna do this high risk, high reward type of play. We can maintain this and we can blast through this dungeon, because with 4 DPS, the overall group's DPS increases significantly. How many times have you run dungeons, depending on certain affixes, depending on certain dungeon, where you're doing, let's say, similar HPS or something like a Prot Paladin? Something like, there's a lot of dungeons out there that require 20k overall HPS, and then you're looking at your damage, and you're doing less damage than a Prot Paladin, you're doing equal or less healing than a Prot Paladin, and Prot Paladin is the leader of the group that tanks everything, and you might look at yourself and be like, hey, am I really providing a lot of value right now? And again, if you're looking at a lot of the poke situations, a lot of the healers don't even like to do damage. So you might be a healer who does less healing or equal healing to a tank, who does very little overall damage, and the whole valuation of healer role, it feels somewhat lackluster. Now, this is relevant only for certain dungeons and for certain affixes, but how could we fix this? So one of my suggestions is, do we go back to Dragonflight initial dungeon design? Do we make, or do we want Season 2 dungeons to have at least a couple of really heavy healing checks that they used to have at the start of Dragonflight? Do we want every dungeon or every couple of bosses in the dungeon to require the healer to pump healing? And I really want to know your opinions here, because this is a discussion video, and honestly, I don't know what the right solution here. I personally really like dungeons like Ruby Life Pools. I love having to pump HPS, having to do as much healing as possible. I love the feeling of, after doing a certain dungeon that requires 50, 60k overall HPS, and you're looking at that and you're like, damn, I did a really good job as a healer. I didn't really care about my damage that much, because if you survive this dungeon, you're going to time this key. And I kind of enjoy that, but I also feel there's probably more people who don't like those really heavy healing requirements, because why would Blizzard nerf initial dungeon requirements? Blizzard initially in beta for Dragonflight was really adamant about, hey, healers will have to heal. And that was evident from the very start. What is the right design that Blizzard should approach? Is it okay to have these lackluster or dungeons where there's not a lot of healing required and a healer is kind of forced to do a lot of damage? Or do you want every healer feel like Ruby Life Pools, where almost every single boss encounter requires for healing checks? Now, second solution to this problem is going to do with increasing the value of a healer by increasing the overall DPS. And I think a lot of people are going to agree or disagree with this, because I hear a lot of comments like, hey, why would I want to do damage as a healer? I roll the healer. But unfortunately, because there's so many dungeons out there, there's so many affixes out there that don't require a lot of healing or HPS requirements, if you're doing highest keys in the world or doing high keys in general, you want to do something in between that downtime, and that is going to involve DPS. Now, personally, myself included, I overvalue the value of healer DPS, because the overall DPS contribution from a healer when it comes to mythic plus dungeons and things like that, it's relatively low. Now, I know there are certain classes out there that can do 40k DPS, but that is not comparable to something like a DPS class who can do over 100k DPS. So the overall value of healer's damage, it's not that significant. Most of the time, healer will not be able to do more damage than a tank. A lot of tanks can really pump DPS. So healer's DPS is not as significant as a lot of people make it out to be, myself included. But how do you make or increase the value of healers? You could increase the overall damage that healer can provide. So a lot of these groups might be like, hey, I want to do this 4 DPS 0 healer composition, but it's not worth it. Let's bring a healer who's gonna pump DPS, not the same amount as a DPS class can do, but significantly more maybe than a tank. So we bring a healer that provides a decent amount of damage. They're going to babysit the whole group. They're going to provide magic dispel, which again, very few other DPS classes can provide. And we're going to be running that, 3 DPS, 1 healer, 1 tank composition. So that's one way of improving the value of healers. And that is basically the summary of the video. I have 2 solutions to this possible problem: increasing the value of healers by increasing HPS checks in dungeons. I'm a person who really likes dungeons like Ruby Life Pools, a person who likes these HPS checks. But I also know that there's a bunch of healers, especially in lower keys, who get anxiety by doing dungeons because they're scared of the healer checks, because they're scared of a lot of other players in the group taking unnecessary damage, and they're blaming you. And this is why I feel Blizzard nerfed a lot of these dungeon requirements or healing requirements initially, because I think people in these lower keys complained a lot because they were scared of how it felt being a healer. I personally think increasing healing requirements and making you feel like a healer in dungeons is a pretty decent way of changing or increasing the value of healers. Now, if Blizzard doesn't want to increase or add HPS checks in every dungeon, if they don't want healers to feel like, again, have this anxiety, I think you could increase the DPS of healers. So if you don't have anything to do during these certain dungeons where nothing's happening, no one's taking any damage, or Prot Paladin is doing a lot of off healing for you, you can do damage and do good damage. More than what you're doing right now, because healer damage overall right now is not all that significant. Now this also will pose a lot of different opinions, because a lot of healers don't want to do damage, a lot of healers play healers just to heal. Again, Blizzard is not going to please everyone in this situation. These are just my solutions, these are just my opinions. I think dungeons in Season 2 should have more healer checks. I actually enjoy healer checks. Pick whichever solution you prefer, or maybe give me your solutions in terms of what would feel right in Season 2. Season 2 is just around the corner, new dungeons are coming back, old dungeons are coming back. How should Blizzard balance these dungeons? There has been some significant redesign in terms of affixes when it comes to Season 2. For example, Blizzard has looked at some of the healer affixes, because a lot of the affixes tend to be healers' jobs, because hey, healer's DPS is not that impactful, so healers should deal with explosive. In Season 2, they've changed the rate of spawn for explosive. Now you're only getting 2 regardless of the pull size, but the HP is significantly increased. But does that mean that it's not going to be a healer's job? I still think healers, instead of tabbing through or clicking 10 different explosives and getting rid of them in one GCD, now they just have 2 explosives, but they have to hard cast their abilities in order to get rid of them. So I still think a lot of the affixes will fall to healers, but you could say that healer DPS might be even more important when dealing with explosives, because healer might have to try a lot harder to get rid of those explosives. Again, healer tank might help out and things like that. Again, this is what it tends to happen in terms of the value of healers, because healers don't provide as much damage. They might have to do a lot of these jobs that no other DPS or tanks want to do. And that is just my 2 cents. This is my overview of the whole state of healing right now in Dragonflight, state of the whole 4 DPS 0 healer type of compositions. What is the value of healer right now? How should the value of healer be increased in Season 2 in Mythic Plus Dungeons? Should there be more HPS checks? Should healer provide more damage so they feel more in line with other DPS classes? Or just be above tanks in general so they provide more value? That is basically the whole concept. What is the value of healer? Let me know about your possible solutions. Let me know if anything should change. Should they look at the healer design or healer checks in Season 2? Let me know, and I'll see you in my next video.